Good afternoon. I'm Frosty Walker, Chief Information Security Officer, Texas Education Agency. Welcome to the first webinar of our fall seminar series regarding cybersecurity. Today we'll be discussing incident response, being prepared. The information presented today has been reviewed by the Data Security Advisory Committee. We hope you find this webinar informative and helpful. Any feedback will be appreciated. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Should you have questions during the presentation, feel free to submit them and we'll get to them during the Q&A session. The Data Security Advisory Committee provides guidance to the Texas education communities, maximizing collaboration and communication regarding information security issues, cybersecurity resources which can be utilized within the educational community served. The DSAC is currently comprised of representatives from school districts, ESCs, Texas Education Agency, and the private sector. I would like to thank all of the people that work on that committee for caring enough to share their time and resources in helping provide some of this cybersecurity information to all the school districts. Thank you all very much. A recording of all the webinars, including today's, will be posted on the Cybersecurity Tips and Tools located at the Texas Gateway, https://www.texasgateway.org under Cybersecurity Tips and Tools. If you go to that website under texasgateway.org, you will find the cybersecurity data, cybersecurity tips and tools folder located on the front page. Before we get into talking about actually an incident, which may involve the exposure or of personal information or personal identifying information, sensitive information, confidential information, let's talk a little bit about some of the definitions regarding those types of data. So confidentiality provisions applicable to school districts and charter schools, students. FERPA defines personally identifiable information to include student's name, the name of the student's parent or other members of the family, the address of the student's family, a personal identifier, such as social security number, student number, biometric record, or other indirect identifiers, such as date of birth, place of birth, mother's maiden name, or other information that alone or in combination is linked or linkable to a specific student that would allow a reasonable person within the school community to identify the student with reasonable certainty. FERPA is applicable to personally identifiable information containing education records. Education records means those records and files and documents and other materials that contain information directly related to a student and are maintained by the educational agency or the institution. Both FERPA and the Texas Education Code address directory information. A school district is permitted to designate certain information about students as directory information that is publicly available. However, a parent or eligible student must be given the opportunity to opt out of the directory information. Directory information may include student's name, address, phone number, email address, photograph, date, place of birth, grade level, enrollment status, dates of attendance, participation in recognized activities and sports, and honors and awards received. FERPA also provides the results of individual student performance on academic skills assessment instruments are also confidential and may be released only in accordance with FERPA. However, overall student performance data must be aggregated by ethnicity, sex, grade, subject, campus, district, and can be made available to the public. This data may not contain the names of the individual students or teachers. So there's some of the personally identifiable information that we talk about for the students. Let's address some of the information regarding educators and district employees. Education code provides the results, whether that's numeric score or pass-fail, for an educator's certification exams or confidential. Also states a document evaluating the performance of a teacher or an administrator is confidential. Provides criminal history record information must not be disclosed except under certain circumstances. Government code also provides the home address, phone number, emergency contact information, social security number, information that reveals whether the individual has family members, is exempted from public disclosure if the current or former employee of a government body makes the election to withhold such information from the public. In addition, there's more and considered confidential regarding educators and district employees. Government code provides the name of an applicant for the position of superintendent of a school district is exempted from public disclosure, except the board trustees must give public notice of the name or names of the finalists being considered at least 21 days before the date of the meeting in which final action or a vote is taken on the employment of the person. It also provides an informer's name or information that would be substantially identify an informer is exempt from public disclosure. Informer is defined as a student or former student or an employee or former employee of a school district who has furnished a report of another person or persons possible violation of criminal, civil, or regulatory law to the school district or reported to the regulatory enforcement authority. It provides a credit card, debit card, access device number, a card, a code, account number used to obtain money, goods, or services is confidential. Also states a personal email address is confidential. This does not include the work email address of a government employee. And then it provides the social security number of an employee of a school district in the custody of a school district is also confidential. So you can see that we're talking about potentially a lot of data that's classified as confidential or as personal identifying information. Texas Business and Commerce Code talks about breach notice criteria. We're required to report any breach of system security after discovering or receiving notifications of a breach to any individual whose personal identifying information was or is reasonably believed to have been acquired by an unauthorized person, if it's not encrypted. Let's talk a little bit about two phrases here. Or is reasonably believed to have been. So we can't confirm that someone that was unauthorized actually accessed that information. However, it may have been exposed to the point that anyone or someone could have had access to that. We may not have proof that they did, but we have reasonable belief that it may have been. Then that's considered is going to require notification of a breach. When we talk about encryption, and encryption, that data can be at rest or it can be in transit. But if the data is encrypted, we don't necessarily have to notify unless the person that was unauthorized also has the decryption code. We see data encryption deployed in a lot of places when, for example, when data is at rest, it's not being used so that you can't just pick it up and read it. Or you also see that when we're talking about in transit from a user's browser to the application server. When you see it's being transmitted through SSL, secure socket layer, or port 443, you see the little lockup in the browser indicating that it is encrypted. For example, you'll see that when you're dealing with your bank or those, that's an indication when you see the lock that data is being encrypted at transit. So when we're dealing with confidential or personally identifiable information, we'd like to see that encrypted in transit as well as at rest. And the reason for that is because of this clarification in breach notice criteria. Let's talk a little bit about the life cycle of a breach. The very first thing that we have in a breach is the discovery. Once the data exposure is discovered, then we have to assemble the response team, and that could be led by a third-party vendor, depending on the size and complexity of the event. For example, Equifax, who just announced a huge breach this last week. I'm fairly certain they've got multiple teams, third-party teams in there helping them try to resolve that issue. We have internal notification. So we have to know who we're going to notify internally and when we're going to notify those folks internally. We're going to investigate and remediate. And again, depending on the expertise that you may have on your team, depending on the size and complexity of that breach, you may have to bring in a third-party vendor to help you with that. You're also going to have to potentially contact the authorities on a as need to know basis. And you need to know what authorities you're going to contact. Employ vendors such as forensics, data breach resolution law, and public relations firms as needed. Again, working with third parties, depending on how complex that may be. You're going to begin the notification process and potentially procure protective services for the affected. You're going to go through a notification of those affected parties. And again, that may be led by a third-party vendor depending on where that breach occurred and how your contracts are termed. An example of that would be if you had someone providing cloud services for you, and they actually notified you that they had a breach. You need to go back and look through your contract, and it may specify as to who would do notification in that case. But if they are required to do the notification, I want to point out that you want to make sure that those notifications, when it goes to the affected parties, as well as any public or media release, you and your upper management and legal team need to review those documents to make sure that they correspond to what you want to be telling the public and those affected parties. You're going to make a public announcement. You're going to need to have a single point of contact. Again, that could potentially be led by a third-party vendor. Your single point of contact may be a website. It may be a help desk. It can be a variety of things, but you do need to have that single point of contact for the public and affected parties to contact. You're going to need to respond to those inquiries. You may have parents. You may have, again, media, the public. You need to be able to respond to those in a timely manner. And the last thing is you want to resume business as usual. This can take each one of the breach takes on its own personality. The length of time that it takes to resolve that varies from time to time. So you want to resume business as usual. You want to do that as quickly as possible, but you want to make sure you're doing a thorough job in your remediation, in your investigation. So I want everyone to remember that panicking won't get you anywhere once you've discovered a data breach. You're going to need to accept what has happened and begin immediately following your documented process. Let's look at a list that has the first 24-hour checklist. And so these are things that we need to be doing in the first day that we actually have discovered that we have an issue and we've had an exposure. We're going to record the date and the time when the breach was discovered, as well as the current date and time when the responses efforts began, when someone on the response team was alerted of the breach. We want to alert and activate everyone on the response team, including external resources if needed, and begin executing your preparedness plan. Secure the premises around the area where a data breach occurred to help preserve evidence. Remember, we may not be talking about just a computer breach here. We could be talking about a break-in, files taken, a filing cabinet taken. So we have to preserve and secure the premises until we can bring in the proper authorities. If we're dealing with a filing cabinet that was stolen or removed, we will be talking to the local authorities. On the other hand, if we're talking about a computer or server breach, we may not be able to, the local authorities may not have jurisdiction, and we may be needing to contact the FBI. So we have to work through each one of those, and depending on what type of circumstance it is. We want to stop additional loss. So you want to take a machine offline. You may want to unplug it from the network to prevent any additional loss. You may not want to turn that machine off or start probing on it until you have a qualified forensics team or someone that can review that computer for you. You want to document everything that's being done and when it's being done so far on the breach. Who discovered it? Who reported it? To whom it was reported? Who else knows about it? What type of breach occurred? What was stolen? How was it stolen? What systems are affected? What devices are missing? Those are just a few of the things that we look at in the first 24 hours. In addition, we want to interview those involved in the discovery of the breach and anyone else who may know about it. Document your investigation. If the person you're interviewing is willing to let you record that interview, you may want to do that. If not, just be sure you're taking as accurate notes as possible. Review protocols regarding disseminating information about the breach for everyone involved in the early stages. You want to assess priorities and risks based on what you know about the breach. Throughout the breach investigation, priorities may change as you discover more and more about actually what has indeed happened, how much data may have been exposed. You may bring in your forensics team to begin an in-depth investigation. All of that, again, within first 24 hours. Notifying your law enforcement if needed, after consulting with your legal counsel and your leadership. So that's a list of just what we want to look at in the first 24 hours. In addition to that, if we're dealing with a third-party vendor, someone who's providing services for you, you're going to need to review the contract for potential steps as outlined in the contract regarding notification and a data breach. You're going to need information from the third party. At a minimum, you're going to need a root cause analysis, which includes what happened and when, how it was discovered, a list of exposure. Again, we're going to maybe be notifying those folks. Remediation process used to remediate, a remediation completion date, and a verification process. How did they verify that we really did remediate that situation, and a verification of completion date. In addition to that, for example, if that was involved a vulnerability, I would want to know in an application, I would want to run my own vulnerability scan or use a third party potentially to verify that that this won't happen again. So there's a process that you have to deal with separately regarding a third party vendor. Let's talk a little bit about the notification process. First of all, we talk about internal need to know. You need to have documented who you notify internally and when. I have my team immediately notify me whenever they discover something that looks suspicious. Once I've documented all the details about something that looks suspicious or maybe a potential exposure, I notify our CIO, Melody Parrish, and I explain what's going on, and I will keep her updated. Typically, when we're doing investigation like that, I may give an update every couple of hours. Recently, I had an situation in which I was contacted by one of my team. We had somebody logging into an application on a weekend, but it appears as though they were logging in from China. We looked through the notes to see if that person might have told our help desk that they were traveling, and we had no notes on that. So I actually made the decision to disable that person's account to potentially stop the loss of data. Then on Monday morning, I tried to contact that person, John Doe. I got a voicemail that says they were out of the office. I then contacted their supervisor, who informed me that John Doe was actually out of the country. Asked them if they could tell me where he was, and they said yes, he's in China. And so I said, okay, then that at least tells me that was probably indeed John Doe. We didn't have a real issue here. We documented all of those steps, and then we closed that investigation. So a lot of times when you get in this and do this, you get to a point and you go, well, no, we didn't have an exposure to anyone unauthorized person. But you have to know what that process and who you're going to notify and when. Again, you may look at notifying the authorities. Exposure notification to affected parties. Fall under that notification breach criteria. You're going to make a public announcement with a single point of contact. You're going to respond to inquiries, and again, you're going to try to get back and resume business as usual as quickly as possible. One of the resources that I use, because we're talking about a lot of data, is the Incident Response Team Red Book that was published by the Department of Information Resources here in Texas. That book is a wealth of knowledge in regarding breaches and references. So inside the book, there is a glossary with the acronyms. If you might need an incident response policy, it has a sample or an example of one of those. It has a privacy and security event initial triage checklist of what you need to be doing as you work down through the triage. It has a section on event threat, impact analysis, and escalation criteria. It has a breach notice criteria information in it and post-incident checklist. In addition to those references, it has several templates that are built into it. So it has a template for your contact information, for your plan or your sponsor, who is responsible for heading up the incident response team, as well as your data owners. IT is typically not the data owner. They are custodians of it. Someone else, there's another business unit or administration that is actually the owner of that data, and they're going to be need to be notified as well in that initial process. So you want to notify, what type of data is responsible and who the owner of that is. In addition, it has a template for your incident response team's charter, if you need a charter. It has a membership list and by roles, so you can go in there and add who your team members are and what their roles are. I actually have some additional external folks that if I deem necessary, I list those, and I have after-hours contact if I need to bring them in as well. It has a template for meeting minutes, action item list, and our state government contact information. So it has those templates. In addition to those, there is templates regarding information theft protection criteria. There is internal management alert template. If you need to send that in writing, you have a template that you can customize for that. And there is a sample of what a notice to individuals affected by an incident would look like. You can take that and modify that to the situation. And there's also a template regarding a public or media notice in there. There are external contacts, state of Texas contacts, federal contacts, there are industry contacts, there are press contacts. In addition to that, there are legal references. So we have Texas law regulations on data privacy and security, and we have federal law and regulations on data privacy and security. So all of that information becomes a huge single source of information, and that really makes it convenient when you're working under the restraints in that situation. You don't have to try to look for this in one place and look for it somewhere else, something else. Makes it very nice that it's all has all of those references in one location. One of the things that I like about this book is it has, and we talked about this earlier, the event initial triage checklist. This is on page 12. Anytime I open up a book and start a potential incident, I rename that book with a date on it, and then I start documenting things right in the book. I would identify as to what time I responded, got the incident routine together. I put that in red so I can easily find that, and I document everything that I do right here in this triage checklist. So you assemble your incident response team. You're going to secure the data. You're going to secure data and confidential information and limit immediate consequences of the event. You're going to suspend access and secure or image assets as appropriate. So, you don't want people still using that application because you don't know what's going on. So you're going to have to isolate that incident and suspend access until you can work through this process. Data elements. You're going to determine what types of data, who the owners are, and the amounts of confidential information was possibly compromised. Data source. You need to identify each location where confidential information may have been compromised and the business owner of that confidential information. In today's world of databases, we may have very similar information located in multiple databases. So that makes it harder to determine where was this information potentially compromised. Did it come from this database, or did it come from another database, or did it come from another data source? And that makes it difficult. I've been in the situation where I've had the FBI call and say, we broke up a ring of hackers, and we found a bunch of different data, and it looks like here's some data that appears to be yours, Frosty, and you've got to try to figure out where that data came from. So that's dealing with the data source. Scope and escalation. Confirm the level and degree of unauthorized use and disclosure, by the named or unidentified individuals. I've been in situations where we were able to identify exactly who the person was that accessed that, and I've been in situations where we were not able to identify them at all. So you have to you work through those. Number of individuals impacted. You have to determine the number of individuals that are impacted because of notification. So whether that's 7, 70, 700, 70,000, or in the case of Equifax, 143 million, you're going to have to identify every one of those people, and you're going to have to figure out a way to notify them. You're going to have to document and determine the date of the agency or the contractor knew or should have known of the incident. So you've got the discovery date. You have to work through your management alert. How do you advise the appropriate internal management? We talked about a situation earlier where anytime I expect or have a potential exposure, I take that information and I take it to our CIO of Melody Parish. I tell Melody that I'm going to give her updates maybe every couple of hours until we determine. If we determine that we didn't have an exposure, we notify them that there was not an exposure. We document all of that. We close the book, and we're done with it. On the other hand, if we determine that we did have an exposure, then we have to notify the commissioner. Within a 48-hour window, we also have to notify the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Information Resources. We have to notify the governor's office. We have to notify the Lieutenant Governor's office and the office of the Speaker of the House. So all of those notifications and understanding how and when you're going to notify those. So that starts off with internal and who's going to deal with that, and then who's going to make notification to the proper people in regard to external communications. You're going to investigate. You're going to interview, identify personnel with relevant information to determine whether and by whom access may have been approved or discovered at the risk. And documents. You want to gather and review contracts and provisioning documents. First time we really talked about provisioning documents, but you might have a user that say worked for IT, and then they changed departments. And when they were working with IT, they may have had elevated levels of privileges. When they move to another department, they should not retain that elevated level. And Um, but somehow through the process we may have missed something and they still had permissions to access data. It doesn't have to be that that person themselves accessed it. It could be that they clicked on an email with malware that then allowed someone to capture an ID and you know someone outside the company use those privileges that were not supposed to have been granted to access data. So there are situations that we have to look at. So we're going to have to take a look at the provisioning documents. You're going to do a root cause analysis. You want to prepare a root cause analysis which describes why the event occurred, what business impact it had, and what will be done to prevent the reoccurrence. And you're going to do an event and threat impact analysis. And then you're going to work through the mitigation. You may have to revise your policies, processes, and procedures, business requirements, sanitation of your workforce, enforce contracts to reduce the likelihood that the event will reoccur. So those are some of the things that we have to work through just in the triage. And we talked about earlier where we had we actually do have out on the cybersecurity tips and tools. We have a couple of simple data breach exercises that you could work through with your own individual teams. You can start those exercises off as working, with just in an IT group, and you may want to expand that to include all of your leadership in a tabletop exercise. I know that we're working on the tabletop exercise for early in 2018 with a project that's called Cyberstorm. It's conducted by the Department of Homeland Security. They choose different states to participate every couple of years. And there'll be several agencies working through a tabletop exercise simultaneously. So not only will the agency work through their own and what's going on internally, but then as it begins to impact other agencies and you begin to see how the interaction also works and what might be affected, that becomes a very viable exercise in working through a cyber incident. So we're working with that tabletop exercise right now. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to work with that. So with that, I'm going to, I know we've covered a lot of data today. We will have, I see we have lots of questions. We're going to work through all of the questions. Many of the questions have to do with what is the URL regarding the link for the Texas Gateway org. That is www.texasgateway.org. And under that, we have cybersecurity tips and tools. We'll post that information with all of. We'll post all the questions. And we'll post all the answers under the cyber tips and tools. I'm going to leave this webinar open until our allotted time is up. We have a few minutes for people to continue to ask questions, but we'll post all the answers to those questions up on the portal. If you have any questions that you want to ask me specifically, don't hesitate to contact me. Please reach out to me, frostywalker@tea.texas.gov. And my phone number is 512-463-5095. Anytime you think you may have a potential situation don't hesitate to call and ask my opinion, ask for help. I'll be glad to provide assistance any way I can do that. Yeah. So with that, we're going to start answering questions that we'll post out on the web portal. Otherwise, we're going to give y'all back a little bit of time today. I appreciate your time. Y'all have a great day. Thank you very much again for your interest in cybersecurity and protecting the resources that the citizens of Texas have shared with our institutes. Thank you very much.